This is my 1989 Holden VN Commodore. Quite a few years ago, during the beginnings of COVID, this and its brother, the VN Commodore, exploded in value suddenly, and nobody was more surprised about that than I was. Overnight, they went from being $500 cars for the last 20 years to becoming quite collectible, and nobody would have thought that this would have happened to the old humble VN. But if you stop and think about it, there are actually quite a few reasons why this has happened. The VN was a lot of firsts. It was Holden's first V6. It was Holden's first consumer available, really injected 5 litre. It was a new shape for Holden, and I'm sure a lot of people have very fond memories of the humble VN, whether that's with their family or as a P-plater. Because they have had a bit of a boost in popularity, and I've always had them, I've always been into VNs, I thought that I would make a video talking about VNs, and if you're looking to buy one, or if you're in the market and you want to learn a little bit more about them, then this would be the place to go. The VN came in 2 different series, Series 1 and 2. This particular one is a Series 1. What I'll talk you through with some of the things to look out for will apply to the vast majority of the range, maybe with the exception of some of the HSVs, and they've got quite different interiors and things like that. So these came in Australia with 2 different engines primarily. There was a 4-cylinder version, but nobody really talks about that. In the 80s, when this was being developed, it was getting rushed because they had the VL out with a Nissan motor, and they were trying to get a GM motor in here, and because it was rushed, they put a front-wheel drive V6 in it, and that gives some of the Series 1 VNs a unique characteristic. What I mean by that is the thermostat, which is a reasonably serviceable item, is right up against the firewall, and it is an absolute nightmare to change. And that's because it was a front-wheel drive car, and it was nice and easy to change, and when they've slapped it in here, it has pushed it against the firewall. Series 1s also have a few issues with their coil packs, and you'll know that they're a Series 1 because there's sort of this flat square design as opposed to the other design which they ran right through until the end of the Ecotec. Overall though, the Buick was a pretty strong motor. It was very torquey, very fun to drive. Could get it in a 5-speed manual or a 4-speed auto. I much prefer the manual, if I'm honest. You could also get this engine. Now this is my favorite part of the car. This is the injected 5 litre, and this was actually new for Holden at the time. Now the motor itself is not new, based on the 308, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and was used in many early Kingswoods and earlier Commodores, but this is the injected version of it. Yes, this engine was available before the VN in the VL Walkinshaw, but this was the first really normal person car that you could get an injected 5 litre in. Now, I am a big fan of these motors, and they really do not have many issues, and there is so many running around today that haven't been opened. In fact, there's another Holden 5 litre about 10 meters away from me that has never been opened and is still running fantastic. So these are excellent motors, but of course they're not perfect. As far as I'm aware though, there are not any 5 litre specific issues that are specific to the VN. This motor is pretty stout, and it was pretty well sorted when it went into this car, so as far as I'm aware, there was not anything specific to the VN. This particular engine out of this car was out of a VS, not a VN, so if there are any little weird issues, but I have tried to get as many VN bits as I can, like this SV airbox. I could definitely go further on in this motor, but I think the Holden 5 litre is worthy of its own video. Let me know what you think about that. You could get the VN in quite a few different flavours, and this particular one is a bit of a bitzer, I must admit. It's an S-Pack dressed up as an executive, but for most people, you're either going to get an executive that looks like this, an S-Pack, Bellina, Calais, an SS, and then the whole HSV range. I am pretty sure that this was the last car that Holden actually had the raw coloured plastic bumpers, with the exception of some taxis and things like that in the VS series. VP had coloured bumpers, VS had coloured bumpers. I believe this was the last one. Let's go straight away to the exterior and let's talk about the faults. I'll be the first to admit, one thing that Holden wasn't very good at is painting in this era, and a lot of VNs, I would say the majority of VNs that have been used as a normal car, are buggered. All the cars have clear peel, all of them have flaking paint. The only reason this one has survived is because it's been repainted. Another very common issue on this series, and this car unfortunately has it, is the doors seem to drop just a little bit. I'm not really sure why this happens, but it is obvious here, as you can see. This isn't specific to this car. I've had this with a lot of VN and VSs from this era. I'm sure it's fixable, but we're not fixing it today, that's for sure. Another thing that perishes on these cars is this rubber under the window, and this one's actually in pretty good condition. You can't quite see it from there, but the rubber is complete even though it's not folded out, but it just seems to shrink, and this one was replaced about 8 years ago and it's already failed. And these are incredibly hard to find good ones. So good luck with that. Now, when you can get a rear-wheel drive manual car for $500, it's no surprise what ends up happening to them. So another thing that you have to check if you're buying one of these, specifically if it's a little bit cheaper, is the rear guards. Now, you want them like this. You want them nice and dead flat. Now, if they're folded up, it's not always sinister. They might have done that to fit some big wheels. But if you're looking for an original one, you want this nice and flat, just like this. Another issue that is synonymous with the VN and VP is these tail lights. Now, this is a bit of a design flaw. As the water runs down here, it runs straight into the loom, and all of these looms corrode. Extremely hard to find good replacements. So that's why sometimes when you see them break, one lights up or three of them work. There's actually quite a lot going on here. I have spent hours soldering and cleaning to get these as good as I can, but it is not easy to get them bang on. If you're looking to buy one and there's a blown globe, it might not be as easy as just replacing globe like it is on literally every other car. Another issue that is very common is with these door handles. It's almost always the driver's one, and this one has actually failed as well. So what has happened is sometimes when you open it like that and it stays open. That is a very common thing. All that happens is you just have to flick it down by hand. But yeah, very, very common issue. Not really a huge one. All the other ones on the car work great. We're back in the engine bay. One of the most common things that fails in here are the bonnet hinges. And this is particularly bad because when they fail, they collapse and smash the windscreen. And I've actually had it happen on this car. So these are the second set, and I do have another set as well. Very difficult to find a set that actually fits properly. The elephant in the room with these cars is rust. Now, I'm very, very lucky. This particular car has none. But there are 4 places where it is extremely common. The first one is up here, all around the windscreen and underneath the rubber. It is a little bit tricky because sometimes it is hiding underneath the rubber. So if you're suspecting it, it can be anywhere on the pillar, on the roof. This is a super, super common place for these to rust. And the rear window is exactly the same. Up on the top, down the side, and in this little crevice between the boot lid. Another extremely common place is underneath the battery here, in the battery tray. This one can be pretty easily fixed, so it's not the end of the world, but that is one of the most common places it rusts. The other most common spot is the well that this spare tire sits in. I love these cars more than anyone, but would I daily drive one? No. These cars are really getting on now, and this particular one is 36 years old. I know. It's no secret that these cars lack a lot of modern luxuries, but the most important one by far and away is safety. Safety is lacking in these cars. You're not going to get any airbags. You're not going to get really any safety at all. These were being developed in the mid-80s. They didn't have any of that stuff. I wouldn't recommend using one as a daily driver. However, as a weekend car, as a hobby car, as a cheap fun car, yes, I would recommend it, because even if you're not really into cars, for the price you can get these, they do go extremely hard. What should you pay for a VN though? That's actually a really hard question to ask because the values of these are all over the joint. And if I told you advice 2 years ago, it would be totally different to what it is today. And who knows when you're watching this video. What's important to remember is just because it's an executive, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be the cheapest one just because it's a base model, because these particular ones are actually quite desirable. I would almost argue that a clean executive is more desirable than a Balena and a Calais. However, in terms of right now, I wouldn't expect any good V8s really at all for less than 10. And for an example like this, a manual cam V8, you're probably looking at high teens to early 20s. You could probably get a V6 in similar condition like this for probably around $10,000, but you can still get good running, cheaper ones that are pretty rough for less than $5,000. Now the SS's, they can go anywhere from $20,000 to $45,000, $50,000 for a really, really clean one. And then the HSV range and the SB5000, I mean, the sky's the limit with those really. In terms of colors now this particular car is Marinello red, and I think this color looks great on an executive. Now it's hard to talk about the VN without mentioning the BT1. Now the VL and the VN are specifically known for this. BT1 was the nomenclature printed on the tags to tell you pretty much that it was a police car. They often looked exactly like this as a pop pack executive, but with Holden's 5-litre. Now this one is not a BT1. They did come in white, which is very common, but most desirable is they came in yellow. Now this is a pretty rare car. If you have a yellow 5-litre BT1, I'm jealous because I would like one of those. But another really great colour is in the South Australian particular model. It's this sort of light baby blue. Now that is a very, very rare car, and I have never even seen one in person, mostly because I don't live in South Australia, but it is a very, very rare color. Another thing that's worth talking about is basic parts for these cars are now getting very difficult and very expensive to find. Now, oil and filter and plugs, like that stuff is fine. But what's hard is finding interior trims, door molds, good sets of tail lights and headlights. That stuff, it can be really, really expensive. Just as one small example, some of the really rare original headlights with the Holden logo on them, they can go for up to $1,000 for a set of headlights. I have paid upwards of $600 for some of the interior trims in this car just because they are so easily damaged and it is insanely hard to pull them out without breaking them, and you just can't get them anywhere and there's no reproduction. So because these cars are so old and there's so few good ones left and lots of people are restoring them, it is very difficult to find good parts. However, companies like Rare Spares are rapidly improving their range, which is great. So my advice is if you're looking for one, try and find one with at least a totally complete interior, because finding bits for that would be an absolute nightmare. Now, I do admit interiors are a little bit of a weak spot. One of the biggest problems with these cars is that as they age, they haven't been looked after. It can feel a little bit like driving in a haunted house. Lots of creaks, lots of rattles, who knows where to start. And that is just a common thing with Commodores and Falcons from this era. It's just the way these cars are. And unfortunately, this car is no different. Really common things to go wrong in here. The speaker grills on the dash crack or rust. The steering wheels always roll at the top and they fade and the glue comes apart and they just disintegrate really quickly. A lot of these cars have been smoked in heavily, and that is another thing that is a big concern for me. I hate smoked in cars. I'm very fortunate that this one hasn't been, but that is something that you will have to probably deal with if you're looking at buying these cars, so budget for a steam clean. Interior parts are exceptionally hard to find for these cars, good ones anyway. Especially genuine manual surrounds, although Rare Spares do them. But in particular, that quarter window, which you can see up there, they are so hard to find and they crack so easily. And again, the only reason this one's any good is because they've been replaced. This head lining as well is black. That is not typical. Again, a head lining of this era, it's gonna fail. If it hasn't failed already, it will. This is not a factory color. I'm not sure why the person put it in black, but I like it, so I'm gonna leave it. Another thing that's super common is the door rubbers failing, and these are really hard to find. And in my opinion, the aftermarket ones are no good. As you can see, I have an aftermarket one in there and it just fails all the time. I push it in every other day and it always falls out. The genuine ones are the best. However, everything else is pretty normal. The 90s car in here. These are old cars now, so there is going to be wear and tear on all of the bits that you touch. The carpets wear through, that's another thing. The center consoles always come loose and they sort of slide away, and that creates a gap underneath the dash trim and the shifter surround. The one that VN and VSs are most famous for is the dash cluster not working, and you got to smack the dash to get the fuel gauge to work, along with the odometer not working. The vast majority of odometers in these cars are likely not genuine. The odometers always break, so a lot of people just pull them out. It's as simple as pulling it out and putting a new one in. It's not hard. It can be done in 5 minutes. Now in this video, you may have noticed I haven't really talked about anything underneath the car. I was trying to gear this video towards if you were going to buy someone and this car was at somebody's house, not really going to slide under and have a look. But they do have issues underneath as well, but they're not really too specific to the VN. Front lower control arms, center bearing issues, leaky rear main seals, probably a pretty major one. I've had to do front caster rod bushes on all of my VNs as well. However, all of this stuff would be dealt with if you take it to a roadworthy. So this is more focused on the things that you can see easily on a car inspection. I hope that you guys really enjoyed this style of video. Now, when I started recording this, I also put this question out on my social media. And here's a small snip of some of the things that people have said. Now, a lot of the things I have actually covered in this, which is great. And there are a few that I haven't as well. So what I'm hoping this video can be is that anything that I have not mentioned, anything that I've forgotten, and anything that I've left out in this video, which there is plenty, please feel free to put it in the comments. Then anybody that is wanting to buy one of these cars can come to this video, listen to me yap about them, and read the comments of stuff that I might have made a mistake on, or things that I have forgotten to talk about, or things that I just don't know about. If this is your kind of video, please follow along for this kind of content. I also do these. I actually work on the cars and I do talking head videos. And I've got a VT, a VX and VSs in the shed as well, so I can do the similar videos on that. If you guys like the channel, feel free to support me by having a look at some of the licensed Holden merchandise that I sell. I had someone ask me, it is really licensed by General Motors. And like and subscribe and follow along with what I do here. Thanks very much.